Okay, so this is such an interesting time, isn't it? Right in the middle of the captivity occurring between the first return of Zerubbabel and between the final return of Nehemiah. It's right between there. Even though Esther's after Ezra and Nehemiah in the order of books in the Bible, the story happens between the two. And we talked last time about how that such an interesting point, which is what we're going to get into today, was how that the promise of the Christ to come in this instance is hanging on a thread with the threat that is before the Jews. And so it's a very critical moment here as the Jews are in captivity. There's still yet that promise of return and the remnant, and from that remnant would be the King and the Savior. But here we have impending doom developing. So we have gone over the questions for chapter 1. We stopped there because of time last week. And so we start with the questions for chapter 2, which I think is number 7 on your sheets. Is that correct? And then I think Bridget had the last one, which would have been right in there. And so, Ms. Ann, do you want to take number 7 for relating to chapter 2? Okay. All right, we're going to keep moving right on back. Take number 8. Okay, good. Number 9.
Was Esther among those who met together because her identity known? She wasn't among those gathered together and her identity was not known.
Yes. Okay, by the way, I forgot to ask, anyone need copies? Steve has some here. I'll take those to you. Okay. Number 10. Sandy, do you have number 10? No? Okay. Coming back up here to the front, Raymond.
What procedure of purification was seen in humans used? Verses 12 through 14. They were taken for 12 months, and they were given things to become purified, such as the myrrh oils, over 6 month times. And then each maid was taken to the king, and he in the evening she went out. And the next day returned to the house of the women. Sunrise.
Okay. It's a fascinating process. Took a long time. The tradition was really strong. Number 11.
Was Esther chosen to be queen?
Yes.
And number 12.
What plot was discovered by Mordecai at this time? There were eunuchs going to lay hands on King Ahasuerus and kill him. Mordecai passed along the information to Esther, who told the king as an honor of the office.
Okay. So fortunate connection, inside connection for the king to have someone connected with Esther outside there to discover that. And number 13.
Was famine and what happened to him at this time? He was son of Emma, the Agag
Okay. And what did we say last week about Haman and his nationality? Said he's an Agagite. What did we say about that? An Amalekite, right? And so we remember the history of that when they were to be completely destroyed, but they were not. Right. So would he have not? That's such an interesting point. He would have hated the Jews because it was Samuel that Laurie's saying that hacked his grandfather. Is that what you said? That hacked his grandfather into pieces. So you think he doesn't know about the Jews and doesn't hate the Jews and hold on to that animosity there. So keep that in mind as this story builds, and remember what Haman's disposition would be toward the Jews. Yes?
That's also another reason that many times God told his people to utterly destroy. And sometimes you hear people say, what about the children? What about the wives? They were innocent. But what happens is that hatred builds up in that family
Yes.
against his people. So the command to utterly destroy would wipe out that generation
Yes.
of hatred.
Yes. It's almost like it's not just for the purpose of wiping out people. It's to wipe out a problem, you know.
During the trials after World War II, one of the reasons that some of the Germans gave for why they killed women and children was because they said, once we kill the Jews, we have to deal with the children. They would be angry with that as we came along, so that's why we did it.
For the same
It's
purpose.
just it's not a good reason, but it's why they did it.
Hmm. Good points. Okay, number 14.
What happened that upset Haman and his mind? Mordecai would not bow down and pay homage to him. And the king's servants told Haman of this, and this made him greatly upset.
Okay. So we see a little bit of pride, a little hint of pride here in Haman, and that's something we've got to keep in mind as the story continues. Number 15.
What the king proposed to the king, and did the king approve that all the Jews be destroyed? Yes.
Okay. And number 16.
What the Haman proposed, that should, 13 till the 12th month, violate all these species on the concessions.
Okay. So to annihilate the Jews. And so he approaches the king there, verse in number 15. And how does he describe the Jews to the king? A certain people. I didn't really tell him who it is, but a certain, well, I don't know, he could have, but a certain people. Okay, and now at this point, does the king, does he know Esther's background? Does he know her, who she is as her nationality? Not at this point. Laurie?
Also, you need to remember that Cyrus was his grandfather, and Cyrus was the one that set up the Jews.
Cyrus was a Xerxes. That was easier. I have an easier time. So King Cyrus was Xerxes' grandfather, and Cyrus was the one that was kind to the Jews, and was the one that had. This is the one that had Zerubbabel to return, right? Okay, so so the contrast there being that you've got the king and his family background, people that were kind to the Jews, and you have Haman and his family background, people that hated the Jews. How interesting is that, to see that contrast?
Well, did Mordecai tell Esther to not allow who she was?
Yes.
He said don't.
He said, don't.
Have a secret, don't tell nobody.
That's right.
Because he knew of Haman or the other.
Well, and when he said not to say anything about her background, that was before Haman was put into place, about 5 years before. But for whatever reason, he said, don't say where you're from. Because, I mean, you think about, Haman knew we are a people in captivity. And so I think from that standpoint, that could compromise her opportunity to be thought of in favor. So it may be just for that reason alone. Okay, so that completes our questions through chapter 3. And we will continue on with further in our text. All right, so the time is set for the Jews based on Haman's request to the king that these people be annihilated, all based out of his despising how he's been treated by Mordecai. So it's not just enough for Haman to say, I'm going to take care of this man who's not paying honor to me. I'm going to wipe out all of his people. Okay? Because he found out who Mordecai was, found out that he was a Jew because of the king's servants that were with Mordecai in the gate. And those servants are wanting to test Mordecai because Mordecai is standing strong. He's saying, no, I'm not going to bow down to him. And they're asking him daily, why? Why aren't you going to do this? And how often does that happen today? That people see someone's faith in something and someone taking a stand for something, and they, well, let's just see about that. And they challenge. And they challenge him, and they create this situation. Let's just see how strong he stands for this when Haman finds out. And he learns that he's a Jew, so he decides, I'm going to take them all out in his rage. And so he sets this up through the king. The king kind of oblivious to just what he's about to do. Take care of it, Haman. And he does.
I think through his wisdom, Mordecai's wisdom, telling Esther not to allow who she was, that he might have a reason in his mind that there would be a time when somebody might find out who they were and to kill them all.
Mm-hmm.
And then she's become queen. And so, I mean, exactly how to explain it, but, you know.
His potential, and who knows what he thought. But it turns out that withholding that information gave her some protection to a certain point, but then with her getting in the good graces of the king, also created an opportunity to save them all. And so it's really interesting how things are going to flip around here. Okay, so chapter 4. The decree goes out. Mordecai learns of all that had happened, tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and ashes, and went out into the midst of the city and cried out with a loud and bitter cry. And there's all through the land great mourning and weeping among the people. Everyone is in despair. I mean, you think about this, if you're a Jew and a decree is issued and sent throughout all the land and all the cities and all the towns, and explaining, on this day, these people are to all be put to death. All people, women, children, and you're one of those. And you know and you find out your days are numbered. great mourning and weeping and lament in the land. No doubt. So Esther finds out about this. She learns of Mordecai's behavior and he's upset, wants to know why. She sends messengers out, find out what's wrong with Mordecai. He's in sackcloth and ashes, which was inappropriate for him as far as what he was doing. And she sends clothes out to be cleaned up, and Mordecai refuses the clothing that's sent to her. So Esther calls one of her servants, a eunuch that works with her and attends to her, and his name is Hathach. And she sends Hathach to ask why. What's going on? Why are you so upset? Because she hasn't learned of this information. Remember, she's in the palace, right? The decree's been sent out and posted everywhere out there, but she doesn't necessarily learn of the business that's going on, and she finds out through Mordecai. So Mordecai sends message back through Hathach. So you can just see they're not in the same room together, but they begin this conversation, and these messages are being brought back and forth by Hathach, her eunuch, and others that were attending with him. But you can just kind of, I don't know, in my mind, I just visualize, okay, what he said such and such and such. Well, then tell him such and such. She goes over and tells him. You can just see the picture developing. Okay? So Mordecai explains, here's what's happened. Here's every detail that's happened between how that Haman's, everybody has to bow down and pay homage to them. I wouldn't do that, and I'm not going to do that. And Haman found out about this, found out that I'm a Jew, decides to kill all. He tells her every detail of what's happened to this point and sends a copy of the decree. Look, this is posted everywhere. Now, Esther understands. But along with that explanation, and here's a copy of the decree, Mordecai is telling Esther in verse 8, show that to Esther, explain it to her, and he wants Hathach to command her to go into the king to make supplication to him and plead before him for her people. Okay? As we've been saying, to this point, does Xerxes know that she's a Jew? No. Mordecai's been telling Esther, don't tell him you're a Jew. Now Mordecai's saying, tell him who you are. Now he needs to know. And Esther's response is, if I approach the king, that means death. You need to understand this, that I can't just walk in and talk to the king because of this custom. And how long did she say it had been since she had seen the king? 30 days. He hasn't asked for me for 30 days. And so for me to just walk in there, I'll die. And then, unless he does what? Holds out the golden scepter. It's just like call off, it's okay to approach. So there's the risk. The risk is this could end my life by doing so. And then we come to what we've been saying would be really the key verse in the whole book. Mordecai says in verse 13, through Hathach, tell her, do not think in your heart that you will escape in the king's palace any more than all the other Jews. Okay, just because you're in the palace doesn't mean this won't apply to you. You will not escape. Verse 14, for if you remain completely silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place. But you and your father's house will perish. Yet, who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this? So, what does he say? Who knows that you've come to the kingdom? What is he talking about? Yeah, the providence. Here's the providence of God. That you've been put in this position, this very unique, very special position. And what kind of an opportunity does it create for God to use you to maintain his promise? You just might be in that position. So I think there's a recognition that Mordecai has here about the big picture. Where are we as a nation? What are the promises? We've said before, God's not mentioned in all of this, but these are his people. We're not talking about hundreds of years have passed and people have forgotten. We're within a 70-year time frame. Mordecai understands that this is hanging on a thread, and he sees this as the opportunity. Exactly. Right. Yes. Yes. So step up and do it. You know, now is the time. I just think of the understanding of the times. You know, I think Mordecai had that. But who knows whether you've come to the kingdom? Who knows whether you've come into this kingdom of the Persians for this purpose? That you've risen and been brought all the way up to the top and can speak directly to the king like so few could. Okay. So that's a very special passage. All right. How does Esther respond? This is interesting. So she says, call for a fast among the people. Tell everybody in the city to fast for me. What happened in fasting? People didn't eat, right? What else were they doing? Praying. So what is Esther saying? Tell everybody in the city, pray for me. Because she's going to do this. She's going to approach the king. So gather all the Jews who are present in Shushan and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. My maids and I will fast likewise. What am I going to do? I'm going to pray. And so I will go to the king, which is against the law, but I will go to the king. And if I perish, I perish. So she gets it. She sees what Mordecai is saying. Yes, you may die, but you're going to die anyway, whether you do this or not. So take this opportunity right now, because who knows? It may work out for good. So Mordecai went his way and did according to all that Esther had commanded him. Verse 17. So everyone is fasting for these 3 days. All right. So we say this. Many prayers to God are being offered up. That is the implication. We understand that much. In the Waldron material, this is a comment that's at the end of this section about Esther. In no book in the Bible is the providence of God more clearly seen than in Esther. It is all the more remarkable, then, that the name of God is not mentioned in the book. Neither prayer nor thanksgiving is referred to specifically, though it is implied repeatedly. And this passage especially, at the end of chapter 4, very strong implications that, yes, there's prayer. Yes, these people were praying to God. And we're talking about God's providence and his watchfulness for his people and his certain ability and will to keep his own promises. Okay, so now, that was chapter 4. Chapter 5, the story continues. Verse 1, it happened on the third day that Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the king's palace. So what does she do on the third day? She puts on her royal robes. I mean, this is important. I'm going to dress for this occasion. I'm going to approach the king. May have been required anyway, but she does. And she's taking this very seriously. And here's the thing, is during this fast, during the 3 days, is she just fasting? Is she just praying and waiting for the 3 days to come up? Why 3 days? What else do we know that Esther's doing during these 3 days? She's planning. She's preparing. She's got this feast that she's putting together in this banquet, and she's thinking through, how can I use this situation? What can I do that would create this opportunity for us to turn this thing around? And you can see the plans. You can see the effort that she's put into this. This isn't just a kind of a flippant, hey, to the king, I'm going to ask you a question. See, there's a setup here. She knows the full set of circumstances. She understands who Haman is. And she understands the background of it because Mordecai has given her every detail. She's fully up to speed here. And so she's going to use her position and this opportunity to the best of her advantage. And she takes these 3 days to prepare for this. So the banquet's already prepared. And we'll see that in just a moment. So she stands before the king, across from the king's house, while the king sat on his royal throne in the royal house, facing the entrance of the house. And when the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court, that she found favor in his sight. And the king held out his golden scepter. So she's permitted to approach him. She touches the top of the scepter. And the king says to her, "What do you wish, Queen Esther? What is your request? It shall be given to you up to half the kingdom." All right. Her answer, "If it pleases the king, let the king and Haman come today to the banquet that I have prepared for him." You see? She was ready. She's coming in not to just jump in and reveal the details. She's like, come to this banquet. And so she invites him to the banquet. And not just the king, who else? Haman. But the king and Haman, the highest of his officials over all the princes of the land, come to the banquet that I have prepared. So the king says, "Bring Haman quickly, that he may do as Esther has said." So the king and Haman go to the banquet that Esther had prepared. And so he asks again, what do you want up to half the kingdom? Now that they're sitting at the banquet. All right, now, ask, tell me. Because she didn't answer fully the first time.
He realizes the risk that she took to come upon him. And so it must be a big deal.
Yes.
That's why it says up to half the kingdom. Because obviously, if you're willing to risk your death to come upon him, you must want to do something.
Yeah.
And so he, realizes it's a big deal.
Yeah, that's right. And I think these are the things that I think that Esther understands too. And she uses the situation as the opportunity, you know. Yes, there's the risk that I might die, sure enough. But there's also this. I mean, he hasn't seen me in 30 days. Okay? And then for me to step in against the rules after this period of time, and just like you say, she must have something. I need to hear what she says, and it must be that important that he would even offer half the kingdom, apart from the fact that he really liked her. She's a good person. So,
It probably says something in secretary about what kind of queen she's been under this point. How she's conducted herself in his presence.
right,
The respect she's shown him and value his role.
exactly.
We get too sidetracked with that, but all of that's behind the scenes.
Right. That's exactly right. And 5 years to develop that. Because 5 years have passed from the time that she was put in as queen in 479, and then it says in the 12th, that was in the 7th year, now in the 12th year. So 5 years of that being able to develop in that relationship. Good points. Okay, so now she asked, verse 8. She doesn't ask. Ahead of myself. She still doesn't ask. Okay, so now, if I've found favor in the sight of the king, it pleases the king to grant my petition and fulfill my request, then let the king and Haman come to the banquet, which I will prepare for them tomorrow. And I will do as the king has said. So now that you're here, and this time Haman gets to hear the king say, Esther, what would you like? Up to half the kingdom. And now Haman's sitting there. And he's hearing this. And she says, come tomorrow to the banquet that I will prepare. So they leave. And as Haman is leaving, meanwhile, Haman leaves. What does he see? Mordecai. What does he see Mordecai not do? He doesn't see him bow. He doesn't see him stand or tremble before him. And he's filled with indignation against Mordecai. So his wrath comes up again. This has happened before. He's already set the decree, and now he walks past Mordecai once again, and even still, even after the great threat of, I'm going to put you and all of your people to death, and even then, Mordecai refuses to pay homage to him. And Mordecai is probably expecting with this great threat. Haman is probably expecting with this great threat before Mordecai that Mordecai would cave, that he would pay homage to him, that he would be begging for his life. But no. And so, filled with more wrath. And he goes home and he calls his friends, he calls his wife, and he sits down and he goes over and recounts all of the things that he's done, all of his great accomplishments, all of his sons, all of his... Look at all these things. And then throw on top of that, Queen Esther has invited me to the banquet. Not just me, only me and the king. How good is that? How big is that? And verse 13, yet all of this avails me nothing. As so long as I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate, as long as he's in that position, and especially with the disrespect that he's receiving, he said, none of this is worth anything to me. And he's so angered by this. And so Zeresh, his wife, says, let a gallows be made, 50 cubits high. And in the morning, go to the king, suggest to the king in the morning that Mordecai be hanged on it, and then go happily with the king to the banquet. Get this done, get it out of your way, and go enjoy the banquet. That's the recommendation. And Haman thought, great idea. And so he does. They build the gallows, they're prepared, and Haman is going to go to the king first thing, as we see in chapter 6, and he's going to make this request for what should happen to Mordecai before the banquet. Yes?
This always reminds me of the same kind of interchange that you have between Ahab and Jezebel. You got a petty little man and being on his own, who's got a scheming wife.
It's the same setup. So, a petty man and then a scheming wife. Bad combo.
And you can see in this too, that in lessons found wherever you read in Scripture, but all of these blessings, all of these riches, all of these opportunities before Haman, one little thing is disrupting all of them.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes that happens to us.
Mm.
Opportunities abound, relationships we have, things we can enjoy, and it's just one little thing sticking out there.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Right.
all somehow or another, and we can't do anything around us because of this
Yes.
little thing.
Yes.
It's just kind of amazing to see that in action.
Mm-hmm.
As we look at this and we go back to the example of Jezebel,
Mm-hmm.
the prophet.
And in the big picture, that thing is a small thing. But then when you mix that with the pride and all of that he had, it just exploded. It's very interesting. Yes?
I think it's intentional that the height of the gallows was mentioned, because I was just trying to picture, I don't know how tall the ceiling is right here, but that's 75 feet, 50 cubits. And if you, I don't know, how tall do you think that ceiling is?
This is probably around 20 feet.
20 feet, okay, so almost 4 times the height of that ceiling.
Yes.
And that, I think, is an indicator of the depth of his hate.
Yes.
That he wanted Mordecai's body to hang. It's hard for us to even
Yes.
imagine 4 times the height of
Yes.
that ceiling. He wanted everybody to know.
Yes.
He wanted everybody to see. I just think that's a valid point that we should have missed.
Would have never thought of that. You think about how the structure of the cities were. I don't know if there were skyscrapers back then. I doubt. But you could probably be a long way off and see a 75-foot gallows and someone hanging on it. That's interesting. It is a good point to make.
Hey, Aaron,
Yes.
isn't the story 10 foot?
Yes.
That's
7.5 stories. Right.
pretty tall.
So 50 cubits, 75, 80 feet. That's up there.
Well, how big is, how big is the king's palace?
I don't know. I don't know. Okay. Where are we in time? Eight minutes. That's impressive. Okay. Not kidding. Right? Sort of. Right. Let it be known. Okay, 2 chapters have been covered, and there's another chapter that we can cover in 8 minutes. 3 in one class period. 3 in one class period. Okay, all right, so now, furthermore, it's still the day before the banquet. That night, the king, trying to sleep, he cannot sleep. So, one was commanded to bring the book of the records of the Chronicles, and they were read before the king. And they got somebody that had a voice like mine. Very monotone. Just please put me to sleep, okay? So they read the records of the things that have happened, okay? The book of the records of the Chronicles. And I also wonder, though, none of this is said. I just wonder. We've been talking about how that things right now for the Persian Empire are not going well. They're losing big battles. They're losing foothold. And you wonder if the king can't sleep for some of that. So go back and review the records with me. You know, let me kind of think through some of these things. Could be something as that. It might not be just to please put me to sleep, but I'm thinking through these. And then they come across, interestingly, they come across the record of this plot against him. And he hears about this, and he said, who was that man? Mordecai. What was done for him? What was done for him? My life was almost taken at that point. Did we honor him? What did we do for him? And so, the answer, well, nothing's been done for him. So the king says, who's in the court? And they look at, well, Haman's out in the court. He had just entered the outer court of the king's palace. Okay? So this is through the night. Okay? So now it's morning. Mordecai has entered the palace, entered the court, and what's Mordecai there for? Because I'm going to suggest that we get Mordecai. I think I just said the wrong name. What is Haman there for? He's there to suggest that Mordecai be hung. That's why he's entering. And here we go. At this moment, the king says, let him come in. And Haman says, what shall be done for the man whom the king delights to honor? And what do you think Haman thought? He wants to honor me. Very natural for Haman to have thought that with his pride and all of the things that he thought were so great and things are going well for him. And so Haman describes his own ceremony of honor. Here's what I think you should do for the person that you would like to honor. And so let's get his royal robe and let him wear your crown and the horse that you've ridden, and we're going to let this be brought around, and we're going to array him in this way, and a parade on horseback through the whole city, and let it be announced and proclaimed, thus shall it be done for the man whom the king delights to honor. And so the king answers and says to Haman, verse 10, hurry, take the robe and the horse and do as you've suggested. Do so for Mordecai the Jew, who sits within the king's gate. Leave nothing undone of all that you have spoken. Oh, the deflation, the humiliation that Haman has at this moment, in all of his pride, and think of where he is, and he just declared his doom. And the worst thing he could possibly imagine would be that he would have to lead Mordecai through the whole city, praising him for what he's done. Oh, the shame. And so they do this. Mordecai goes back to the king's gate where he sat, and Haman hurries to his house mourning and with his head covered. So he's totally embarrassed and ashamed. He tells his wife, and what does she say? If Mordecai, before whom you've begun to fall, is of Jewish descent, you will not prevail against him, but will surely fall before him. And while they were still talking with him, the king's eunuchs came and hastened to bring Haman to the banquet which Esther had prepared. So all these things happened in the morning, and he's had to go through all of the shame and embarrassment. The king doesn't really even realize at this point what Haman is going through. Sends the eunuchs, go get Haman. Our banquet is ready for us. And we're going to hear Esther's request. And that's where we stop in chapter 6. And so we will plan for questions, any further things that Leon wants to cover, and then move forward.